Hello and welcome to this recording of the Trans Drop-In topics. Today's topic is on social transition in times of COVID-19. I'm Jen Martinez, pronouns they, them. I am a doctoral intern and full-time counselor at the Counseling Center. Ethan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Ethan Swift. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them, and I'm also a full-time counselor and doctoral intern in the Counseling Center.
And we also,
go ahead. Also want to credit Renee Mitchell, who helped prepare this presentation.
So before we get into the topic, we just want to set a frame of what this is and what this isn't as well. So we really hope that this topic and the questions and discussion pieces provides an opportunity for you to kind of reflect and kind of identify, the pieces that you're hoping to get from this. And we also want to note that this, as well as the other webinars in the series, are not intended as substitute for psychotherapy. But if you are interested in psychotherapy or want help with a mental health concern, we do encourage you to call the Counseling Center. Our phone number is 410-455-2472 and leave a message to consult with one of our staff members. And then if you are experiencing significant distress, we do, want you to call 911 for emergency help. If you're on campus, to call campus police or to go to the nearest emergency room. So today we're going to be talking about social transitioning, really talking, reflecting on how do you know when you're ready, any tips around the transition, and then talking and reflecting on ways of coming out in different spaces.
Absolutely. So we'll jump into that piece of how do you know when you are ready? Two factors are safety and confidence. And I'll definitely touch on what I mean by confidence. But to get to the safety piece first, so you might ask yourself, are certain people safer than others to come out to start socially transition with? Are there certain spaces, whether that's online, in person, or certain friend groups? For me, I did start with certain friend groups where I had certain friends call me by a name that I was practicing, which eventually became my name. But it was kind of a mix of different names at the time. And I would have certain spaces online. At the time, it was Tumblr, when Tumblr was a place where I would kind of communicate with other folks and learn about the experience of being trans and kind of integrate myself into that before I came out to the wider community. And you might ask yourself, with that safety piece, is my physical safety at risk in any of these spaces? Some folks might find that family spaces are more difficult than other spaces, which might also include emotional safety being at risk. Do you feel like you'll be protected or in a safe place if you come out in those maybe more difficult spaces? And with the confidence piece, so I like to say that confidence can help, but it's not required. It's always okay to come out as questioning or explorative. Like perhaps, I think there's a phrase that, like, how do you know you're trans? And most of the time, cis people don't ask themselves that question. And even if they do, like, I mean, you can acknowledge the fluidity of gender and stuff like that. And, it's always okay to lack confidence in the knowledge you hold about trans identity. We all have varying levels of exposure to that, especially coming out. So if you find that you want to come out, but maybe you don't know a lot or feel like you're not integrated in the culture, that's okay. It's always okay to lack confidence in that. And again, confidence in stating your identity can help, but it's never required. If maybe you don't know what label or what part of the trans spectrum or identities that you fit into, you don't have to know that. Again, it could be a questioning or an exploration. And I'm mindful, Jen, that I'm talking a lot. I want to know if you have any thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing you did a great job of providing this overview. I think one thing I'd add is that all of this is fluid over time, and I think even with the safety piece, that you might even be testing out, who might be safe, who is getting, um, who's not providing the support I want, and being able to kind of reevaluate, and it's scary, and I think that's real, and want to acknowledge that, and it's hard, and I think having compassion for yourself around this is really important too, around the safety piece and around the confidence piece, that that there isn't a roadmap to any of this, and so it is a lot of um kind of reflection, and trying to figure out what feels like your path, and there's no right or wrong way to be doing this. I think it's all based on what feels the most supportive to you at any given moment, um, and to be compassionate with yourself, whether you're not feeling confident enough, um, or feeling frustrated that you maybe aren't taking more risks, or maybe coming out to more folks, that this is a process, and this is um it's a huge emotional risk, and even a physical risk, as Ethan was talking about, and so it's reasonable to feel scared when there is that risk. So I think that's just the piece I would add to that.
Yeah, I appreciate you adding that. I definitely resonate with that fluidity over time as well, especially as it relates to confidence. Like, I think that questioning or exploring sort of feeling is really important throughout the lifespan, if that feels like it fits for you, because it can change. You don't have to come out with the confidence that this will be forever your identity, because, like Jen said, it can be fluid over time. Um, so some tips for coming out or social transitioning. Number one, you are enough, always and forever. Just know that like there's that piece of like not trans enough, or not man enough, not woman enough, not non-binary enough. Just the piece that like, are we doing this right? You are. I mean, if you are who you are, that's all it takes. Um, it's just existing in the world, and you are enough as is. Um, and some more tips: try out different names and pronouns with different friends, friends whom feel like safe people. So perhaps you have a best friend and you want to try out that name with that friend. You have another best friend or a sibling that you're close to, and you want to try out that name. Maybe some friends call you they, them. Maybe some friends call you she, her. And you kind of get a sense of like, how does it land on me? Does it feel like a good fit? I know that's something that I did, and I think it's funny, like who you pick can influence this as well. Maybe you pick a friend you're less close to, and that doesn't jive. Something to be mindful of, but it happens. Um, and then I kind of mentioned this in the beginning. Try being out in different spaces or friend circles before others, especially ones that you're closest to. Maybe folks who are more knowledgeable about trans identity. Being out in online spaces if that feels safer. Try dressing as you wish with certain friends or while alone. Um, I know like there's a phenomena where certain friends might help you go shopping when you haven't had the chance to test this out before, and that's like a really valuable experience. And testing out haircuts. I think like maybe Jen, you relate to this of like finding the right hairstylist is really difficult. Um, I, I I personally like to keep within the community if I actually get a hairstylist to style my hair or a barber. Um, so yeah, Jen, I just want to pause. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because your hair is always really great.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I experienced that was really frustrating and disheartening was just because of particularly, if you're trying to go to some place that's affordable, like Supercuts or anything like that, like a lot of their like haircut menus are gendered, right? The prices are different. And so I think one thing I was like getting really upset about is like I want a buzz cut or something. And I was like, so why am I getting, you know, can I get charged for a men's cut, which is half the price of a women's cut? And then people were questioning my gender and they're like, well, you're a woman. And I was like, and it felt really disempowering and shaming in some ways. And I think, recognizing that might happen, and that I think that's kind of the struggle with navigating spaces where people may not be affirming, and so trying to find, I think one thing I've started to do then is before I go anywhere, I look at their website and is their pricing kind of, is it gender neutral? Um, even if especially if you're not in a place where you have someone in the community who can provide haircuts. I think that's been how I've been able to figure out, a place that feels more comfortable to be able to get a haircut and not have my gender questioned.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that insight. It's a tough place to navigate. And I know some folks like teach themselves how to cut their hair, but not everyone can do that. Um, but I want to validate that it is a really tough thing to navigate. Um, and then one more tip, misgendering and dead naming yourself is very normal while it's coming out. I would say even like now, I've been out for 8 years, I still misgender myself. It's just a part of like internalized, and just internalizing what we've learned growing up, plus having been used to being gendered a certain way our whole lives. Um, and that'll decrease over time for most folks, and whether it does or it doesn't, like I want to validate that it can be confusing. Um, I think for me, I fortunately like forget my birth name sometimes, which is exciting. But I know not everybody can forget that. Um, Jen, anything else on this page before I move on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of similar to the piece I said earlier of just, that I think really coming back to that first point of whether or not you're enough, that I think sometimes you might have judgments of like, we're not coming out enough, or that in some ways, like if we're not, um that we how do I say this, um in some ways, if we're not being completely authentic in every space, that's something negative about us. Whereas, I think really trying to develop compassion about this is hard, and not, that not every place will be safe or feel safe, and not every person will feel safe to us. And so, it's not that you're not being authentic enough, is that you're trying to navigate and survive in a world where, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of not every space is affirming. And that for me, my wish for you is, ab- above all things, is to be safe and to, be alive. And I think, that making those decisions in terms of safety are really important. Um and so it's not that you're um not kind of taking on the mantle and the fight at every point. That I think part of being being safe and being okay is is part of the resistance. Um, and so if you can kind of hold that in moments when it's a lot harder to remember that. And I think another thing I wanted to mention, we might have the resource later, but in terms of the haircut piece, I know that's something that folks have been doing um, around in different cities across the U.S. and during COVID is having the like haircut drop off kits, and there's like a entire kind of collective of folks, and so um, and especially when we might not have access to any sort of hair salon or barber or anything like that, that um, you know particularly I know that hair for me is a really important piece of my presentation, and I think that there are resources and communities who are helping if you're not able to afford your own um, kind of like haircut kit, that folks in the community are organizing around this.
Thanks, Jen. I think I mentioned this earlier. I did, yeah. So most cis people don't ask themselves the question, "Am I trans?" And again, even if they do, gender's fluid. But I just want to validate you asking yourself the probably says something. And I have the cute comic here. I love Sophie, really great artist. Um, but there's no trend of kids being trans or non-binary. It's simply that more kids have the words to describe who they are and feel safe to come out. Um, and I know it says kids, but I think that applies to anyone kind of new in their transition and as folks begin to come out more. Um, so we've talked about this a lot, so I won't go too in depth, but I might ask you to take a moment to pause. Which of these spaces kind of feel safe to you right now? Which of these spaces feel like you would come out in, and what would that look like? Some folks might find their academic environment is easier than their family environment. Some people might find it the other way around. Um, and if there's anyone that feels particularly relevant right now, I invite you to ponder that. I just I would like to go further in depth in these. I'm just mindful that some of these could be a whole webinar. But I want to I want to name that these different spaces will be different level of difficulty for different folks. I did kind of label it in what my sort of thought process was on what like the increasing difficulty, but again, it could be different for everyone. Um, yeah, Jen, do you have any thoughts on this slide before I kind of jump forward? It feels like there's a lot I could say, but again, it could be a whole webinar for each of these.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only thing I'd add is that 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 transitioning and coming out is just an ongoing process, and I think and there's times when you might feel you don't have the emotional resources to manage that in across different spaces, and so I think I keep bringing up this compassion piece because I think it's so important, um, that it takes a emotional toll on you, right, to come out to every person in any context, and that um, and so if it feels like it's too much, and if it feels like it's not safe, or that there's something that there's some sort of competing value with coming out, like in terms of some sort of risk to work, um, you know or to family, or to any other thing, that being able to have some compassion for yourself about um, that it's okay sometimes to feel like not right now, right, that It doesn't all have to happen at once, and that's, if you can do that, that's great. If you can't do that, that's also great, because, I think it's your path and your timeline. Um, and so, you know, don't feel like there's some sort of standard that you need to meet, or that you have to timeline you have to follow, for your story and for your journey to be authentic.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, so actually we have some resources. Jen, if you want to kind of touch on that, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So we have resources for you, in terms of, any sort of things for your own information and your journey. And also, if you need support, particularly, around identity, around safety, and your own, any thoughts of like suicide, or self-harm, the Trevor Project is a really great resource. You can call them, you can text, or even chat online with them. There are a lot of different ways you can do that based on what's comfortable. We also have resources for family members who might want more information or resources. Again, because you don't have to be the one to know all of the things, right? There's so many resources out there, and one of the resources is for, um, even though it says it's for children and youth, um, I think we wanted to add it because there's a way that it has, a lot of these basic terms um, and everything in ways that are really accessible, that family and friends, may find helpful. And there's also just so many resources on Facebook. I know not everyone might be active on Facebook, but there are so many different um, communities for support. If on the left is the resources for the Baltimore area, if you're around here. And then we recognize, like, with COVID, that folks may not be in Baltimore, or may also be international. And so we have provided a list of um, those different groups that you might be able to find support and resources and community online through Facebook. Thank you so much for taking the time to, you know, kind of listen to us and to reflect on this. Ethan, I don't know if there's things that you want to add as we wrap up.
I also appreciate folks who are watching and listening. It's been great to do this. So we do have one more after this, although you may be watching them out of order. The next one's on romantic partnerships. So we're looking forward to that. So thanks, Jen, and thanks, y'all. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ethan.